As we approach the end of summer, the shops are full of new school uniform. But not everyone gets a buzz of back-to-school excitement. Up to 400,000 children in England are estimated not to be in school, up 50% from 2023. Certain groups are more likely to exit the school system completely, including disadvantaged pupils and those in care. According to the 2023 NHS England report, 1 in 5 children and young people aged 8 to 25 had a probable mental health disorder. And that same report highlights that these same children are much more likely to face academic challenges. School refusal typically happens when a child is too anxious to go to school. And with rising mental health rates, it's not a surprise we're seeing more school refusing. Nearly half, 48% of 14-year-olds and 28% of 10-year-olds in the UK say they don't like school. And there's been a 50% increase in home education since 2016. But many of these are not choosing homeschooling for philosophical reasons. Causes vary from mental health to educational needs to neurodiversity. And although we know it's good for children to get an education, traditional school seems not to be working for many of these children. How can the church support children and families who are struggling with education, often to the point where they're no longer in school? I'm Melanie Cave, and today I'm talking to Kate Dommett from Transforming Lives for Good. She's the Programme Development Lead for Early Intervention Coaching. And before joining TLG, she worked for her local church as a Children's Families and Youth Coordinator, where she led a partnership with TLG that has meant that the team has been coaching in their local schools for the past 8 years. Prior to that, she was a teacher for 12 years, and that experience has driven her passion to see struggling children and young people supported with their emotional well-being. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Hi, Kate. Welcome to the Roots for Churches podcast. We're delighted to have you with us. And today we're going to be talking about how do we support families when they're struggling with their children in school. So maybe their children are refusing to go to school for different reasons, maybe anxiety, maybe they just really don't like school, or maybe school isn't really meeting the child's needs. So I think when this comes out, it'll be sort of peak back to school season in the UK. And I'm just aware that as churches, we often go, great, back to school, let's pray, let's commission, everybody must be so excited about starting a new school year. But that's not the situation for many families. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, well, thanks, Melanie. It's great to be here and to reflect on this really important subject, because I think, as you've already suggested, we can have a lot of assumptions about what it feels like in September or Scotland, Northern Ireland, or August time, going back to school and that energy of it being a great thing. But we know that the reality is that there are so many children and young people, and therefore families, who really struggle with children being in school, or if they are in school, actually not thriving and flourishing in the way that they would hope and in the way that we believe is God's plan for that sort of experience of a full life. So it certainly is a huge challenge, and a challenge to the church, I think, to do the noticing and be journeying really sensitively and with insight and a bit of forethought, a bit of sort of developing that understanding of what is going on here in our community, and being able to journey well with those children and those young people and their families. It's incredibly hard for parents and carers. It's hard in their relationship with their children, but it's also incredibly hard if, as humans, it's very normal for us to compare ourselves with others or to make assumptions ourselves that it looks like the whole world is just excited about going back to school. But as a parent, I know I've certainly experienced that sense of looking around me and thinking, I think I'm not experiencing this in the same way as most other people seem to be. And yeah, at those points, as a parent or as a carer, just having people who actually see you and are able to listen and notice is the first thing, isn't it? And there's something there, I think, for churches to be getting involved with.
So one thing might be that we just need to be aware that a lot of our children's groups, our youth groups, are very much geared around the education system. So we meet in term times and we don't meet in half terms. We do after school things, assuming that people are in school. We will break up sort of age bandings based on school years. And although that makes perfect sense and it applies to a large proportion of children and young people, those markers are not universal. And you will have young people who may have disabilities, who might be in and out of hospital, who just for whatever reason can't engage with traditional school. And those markers are kind of throw in their face, hey, you don't fit, or this doesn't apply to you. So, yeah, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of that altogether. But, sometimes it's helpful to name groups different things rather than, I don't know, years 7 to 9 at school. If they have a group name, I don't know, Lightning Force or something like that, then it doesn't spell out, you have to be these criteria to be in this group in the same way. And it allows more flexibility.
It does. And I think it also honours the fact that children actually develop at different rates for different reasons. But we know, particularly for children who experience or have experienced trauma, that often their developmental age won't be matching their chronological age. And often that can be a barrier to school and to a system that, just by its very nature, it is a system. And of course, we want to say that we know that schools are doing their absolute best to accommodate and to also be learning what it looks like to provide spaces that are more inclusive and are able to really create those safe spaces for children that are struggling. But there is a reality to this challenge. And I think particularly for those children who find themselves, well, the old analogy, like a square peg in a round hole, it's so uncomfortable. And it's a huge challenge and very detrimental to their emotional well-being and to their development and to them finding their place in this crazy world that we all inhabit, and finding how to belong and all those themes that are so godly and so who God has created us to be, to find our communities and to live in family and to live in church families and to live in community that feels safe. And us just today acknowledging that for many children and young people, unfortunately, that is not their experience in school, even though that is absolutely not the intention, of course, of schools. They're going out of their way to provide spaces, but we that do feel safe and welcoming. But we know there's a stretch there and a lack of resource often, which is impacting these young lives.
And I wonder if something happened, either this came to our attention more during COVID time period, or if something sort of switched in our psyche. Maybe there was something about nobody being able to go to school for a while. Parents homeschooling and not enjoying it. For most of my friends who did homeschool, that was a very, very stressful time. I think I was reflecting on this with one of my children, and she was like, I loved it. I loved that period.
Yeah.
Especially the first lockdown we had in the UK, there was like everybody, it was like a holiday. There was not much pressure because we didn't know how long it would last. But the second time around, it felt like there was a lot more pressure. And I guess what I'm coming back to is like, off the back of that, as things have come back to normal of some sort, I feel like I've heard more and more stories of friends whose children are just saying, I was actually better when I wasn't at school. I just can't hack this anymore. Now, whether anxiety has gotten higher, and we know that there is definitely some evidence around that, or whether that moment of people not being at school triggered something and the young people thought, maybe I could do this more. But I feel like I'm aware of more and more families whose children are refusing school. And I don't mean sort of playing truant once or twice and going off to smoke behind the bike sheds. I mean, like, I refuse to go to school. I'm not going anymore. This is too much. And from real mental health, like, I'm not coping. And as you say, like, schools are doing the best they can, but they are under-resourced. If you have a whole bunch of young people not coping, schools can't accommodate that. And so there's not a lot of flexibility. And so I know of families who are homeschooling, but not really by choice, if that makes sense. So it's not like, oh, this is a great idea and I have an educational philosophy that I want to do homeschooling. This is homeschooling because my kid is not coping in mainstream school. And I've tried, and we've been into school and we've tried all these interventions and they're not working. And so now parents are then changing their work or giving up work so that they can be around to homeschool, but huge stress on their finances, on their marriage, if they've got one, on home life, and obviously on mental health, all of that. And I just sort of felt like I don't hear enough Christians or churches talking about this, because this isn't isolated. I know friends all over the country where these are the sort of situations. And I had a situation where my youngest was refusing school quite a young age, and it was to do with anxiety. So I think these are live issues, but because they're pockets, and I think there's some shame associated with it, they don't get talked about enough. And I think the church is often in a really good place to connect with these families, to support.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I think, you've mentioned lots of things there. And I think we are learning as we move away from that period of time that involved lockdown, more than one lockdown. And I think we will understand more as we move away from it and see the trends. But as you say, we're already seeing emerging the data that is showing that a huge number of young people and children are struggling with anxiety and other issues around emotional well-being and their mental health. And again, that's not just the children and young people, but whole families. And I think that you are right in that there is often a challenge to the church to truly see this in community and notice it, because it can just be very hidden. It's seen more by the school communities because of the issues around attendance and absence from school. But in terms of church communities, unless there's a strong connection there with school, there's not that dialogue or that insight to understand that these children and these young people are missing from school, and to be curious about why, and to connect with those families, or to feel that call and that drive to be a response, which, as you've already said, there is a real opportunity for the church in that. And that sense of care and love, it's what we're about as Christians, and particularly for children and young people. It's just modeled by Jesus and encouraged by him. And I think it's beholden to us to see this challenge, to be listening, to be sort of waking up to it, and not feeling like there is not much that can be done, because there's always a way, and there's always a response that will transform lives, that will bring change, and that will make a difference to individuals, but then to whole communities. So
you're saying there is a way, there are ways to transform. Do you have some ideas or some pathways? And obviously every situation, every family, every young person is unique, and we're not sort of prescribing a silver bullet to fix a problem, and because the problem may not be fixed by the child going back to school. I think that's where we're coming to, is people are saying that one size doesn't fit all. The school system doesn't work for everybody. But there's something about this anxiety, or the crippling that nature, or the isolating nature of that anxiety for that family and the individual. And churches may, as you say, churches may not know that young people are out of school, but also if there's that level of anxiety, they're probably withdrawing from church and youth groups and children's groups as well. So you may just see a family sort of slowly recede into the background and stop coming. And if we're not really on it, those families that are slipping away are the ones that are actually the ones that really could do with our support. But I think there's something about taking the shame away. But can you give us some ideas of how churches could step into this gap and engage with these families and young people?
So I'm interested in what you described there in terms of the slipping away, and that, for me, that brings to mind a sort of like a picture of a safety net. How are we noticing and creating felt safety so that actually that doesn't happen? So I do think that one way that churches can be doing the noticing and staying connected where they're already connected is to grow in their understanding of trauma, and being a trauma-informed church community that truly has within its growing culture that determination to be a place that feels safe for everyone in the community. I always feel like a good marker of that is if you took like a snapshot of the whole demographic and diversity of a community, and then you did the same of the church community. Are they reflecting one another? Or is there sometimes a narrowness in the sort of the demographic at church? And just being curious and asking ourselves the question as the church, how do we open our doors in ways that enable people to experience felt safety, to feel seen and heard, and to not feel like if life is really difficult, or if often with children and young people, it might be that behavior becomes very difficult. In those moments that as you say, that shame that again is just so much a part of our human condition. Actually, the church can respond differently with understanding, and by journeying with well and building especially those one-to-one relationships that are key in these moments, in order for families to just be held well and journeyed with as they go on a journey of recovery, and it can take a long time. We're not talking about trying to fit people. We're not trying to be the solution that just makes everything better. I mentioned particularly there, we can notice behaviour very quickly. And again, we can assume that behaviour needs a certain response, or that we can find ourselves responding before we've even actually thought about what our response is.
Reacting, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that as we can inform churches and grow in our understanding that every behaviour is a signal, and it's a signal of something that is going on behind and that is being felt deeply. So there's an emotion there that a child or a young person may be struggling with and struggling to express in a healthy way. And very quickly they can end up in a cycle of not actually being understood and feeling more rejected. So I think for me, one key thing is churches being open to and quite determined to become more trauma informed, and more those communities that feel like there's not judgment and there's not assumptions being made, but that actually as a church community, we're all human and we all live in this community together. So there's not that separateness. There is the welcome for all.
And I wonder, like, people listening to this might be thinking, well, that's great if you've got like a children's or youth worker and they go and do some training and they learn about trauma, and then they can lead a really great trauma-informed youth group. But I wonder, actually, we don't need to write off. And in fact, I think this is where smaller churches, they might be stronger in this. So I think a lot of these families, what they actually need is relational support. They don't need a program. They need friendship. They need some quality, great people who'll get alongside them and go, oh, life's a bit hard, isn't it? Can I have a cup of tea with you? Can I hear about your day? What are you learning when you're homeschooling? What's your favorite television program? Tell me more. Tell me what's going on, and let me walk this journey with you. And that relational thing, intergenerational, getting alongside the family, connecting relationally, I think that will be more powerful than having some all singing, all dancing youth worker who's done the training.
Absolutely.
You just see what I mean?
Yeah, I am not thinking programs, or I'm not thinking kind of where people come in to like have things done to them is probably a bit strong, but where there's an intention of kind of like specific learning. It is about culture. Well, we talk a lot about the one and how Jesus went after the one and those one-to-one relationships. I do think there are spaces that can be very beautiful in church that become the kind of the bedrock and the space that initiates those relationships. And there is just such an importance of churches owning excellence in safeguarding and ensuring that as we are encouraging all of these relationships, that there is transparency, really making sure that all children and young people and families are safeguarded. We do have a program called Make Lunch, but Make Lunch is just a space. We say that it's warm spaces and community and meals that matter. So it's churches just opening up their doors. Usually it is actually in school holidays, but some of our Make Lunch clubs actually now run through term time as well. So actually breaking down that barrier that you're describing of what's the difference between holidays and school time, just that consistent space. And the whole just ethos behind it is it's just church just saying, here we are, and here's some hot food, and let's do community together. And out of that space, we then see those relationships grow. And we see, I guess there is that intentionality of those volunteers within the space to be going on a journey with individual families and being willing to commit to that for as long as it takes for well, whatever God's plan is, I guess.
Yeah, I think churches are often doing these things already, but they are maybe labelled in a way, or we think of them in a way that then doesn't invite these other families in. So I'm thinking a church near us runs a lunch for the elderly. They can meet other people and they can talk. Well, does it need to be just for the elderly? Could it also be for some people who are not at school? And wouldn't they benefit from chatting to each other? And we used to run a program supporting sort of parents with mental health challenges, particularly when they had under fives. And it involved food. But there's probably as long as we've got our safeguarding policies and we've really thought this through, there probably really isn't any reason why we can't have the elderly and these young parents and these under fives. I think it would be beneficial.
Intergenerational spaces are beautiful. I think one of the things that churches often do really well are toddler groups. When I was working for our local church a few years ago, we noticed that, toddler groups have just changed over the years. They used to be sometimes called, didn't they, mum and tots or mum and toddlers, with the huge assumption that it's going to be a mum coming along with their child or children. But actually, we were just seeing that change year on year. More dads, more people working from home, sometimes couples coming together, and definitely more grandparents.
Yeah.
And we realised as well through chatting to the parents who were coming along that they were often missing their own parents. So that those grandparents in their lives were geographically much more dispersed. There just wasn't that intergenerational living happening in close community. So we actually started at the same time as the toddler group, we started inviting along a group that was called Knit and Natter. So that was this beautiful group of people that met they literally did just knit and chat. And we just sort of did that in the same space. And we had like some of the parents who they'd like always wanted to learn to knit. So they were sort of chatting there and like learning to do that. But just like those overlaps, I think being open to the Holy Spirit giving us creative ideas, and often we can feel like they have to be very sort of already tried and tested or very kind of planned. I think messy is often better, and intergenerational spaces are beautiful. And there's a richness there that is or has been lost, I think, often in communities, and the church really does have something to offer as we kind of get creative with ideas of how can we do these spaces.
And I think, so it's making these things that we're already doing a little bit more porous when we talk about who they're for.
Love that.
While still keeping things safe. I just think, if you've got an under fives, parent and toddler group, well, why not involve a teenager who is not in traditional school, and they might want to be a helper. They might come and clear up, set down. But again, there's some educational stuff going on, but the community and the purpose they'll get, just being part of it is really significant. And then you've got the opportunity, as you say, through all of these sort of settings, to then build the relationship that then means that you can have significant and more supportive conversations later.
And that is truly being inclusive. So what you're describing there, we had exactly that. We had a mum coming along to toddlers. Initially, she came with just her child who was preschool age, but it emerged that she was homeschooling and she was having to get cover for her other children while she came. So they just came as well. And it was wonderful. And it's not difficult to accommodate different ages. Again, I think it's, as you described at the beginning, it can be a bit of a mindset that we're all stuck in, that actually through the year there's these calendar patterns, but also in terms of ages. I've just come out of school actually, and I'm spending an hour a week at the moment with a child who's in year 3, and they just had gone to their next class. So this morning that's what had happened, and it was really interesting because we were just doing some glittery painting, and they said, I wonder what it would be like to be in a class with people of all different ages. And I thought that was so interesting because they'd had this morning where they seemed to have tuned into the fact that they were like moving up. It's like this very significant thing. I mean, it's a huge transition for a lot of children. So not only are we talking, when we talk about September and it being really exciting, not only are we making the assumption that children are excited about going back to school, we're also assuming that they're just going to love going back to a completely different adult, a completely different room, often a different school. And it's huge what we're understanding now about how children experience change and how transition for some children is hugely triggering and actually is a hook into experiences that they've had that have been very challenging.
Yeah. Well, situations where you're out of control because you don't get to choose who your teacher is. Or which classroom you're in.
And which friends you get to be with. Sometimes they ask you one or two, and that was the first thing that the child that I'm coaching at the moment mentioned, that the one friend that they were really pleased is going to be in that class. So it's that attachment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what we're understanding as we, just consider how children who struggle with attachment then are likely to struggle with change and the preparation needed and the care and attention needed there. So I think, again, there's something there for the church to be really positive about, because church is consistent. We don't say, I mean, maybe we do if you're going to a different Sunday group on, in September.
I was just thinking we've just transitioned our year 6s up to the youth group. And it's exactly like school. And I was thinking, like in an intergenerational setting, that you don't have that anxiety because the people stay the same. You get a bit older, they get a bit older, but we're all still together.
Just a flow, isn't it? And of course, I mean, we also we're old enough to know that life happens and a lot of change happens, and we do want to be building emotional resilience in our children and young people, and we can't protect them from all of that. We're always, with coaching, we're talking about building their toolkit and building like their emotional first aid toolkit so that they do become more resilient. But we want that to happen gently, and we want it to happen in a supported and understood way. And it's those wrenches that can really be very challenging. So I think, again, for the church to see the beauty of who we are as an intergenerational community that is welcome and is family to those who, are part of the church community, the family of God, it's the most beautiful, wonderful thing.
So let's come back to TLG, Transforming Lives for Good. So as an organisation, you have lots of sort of fingers in different sort of streams of connecting with families and children and young people. So part of that is equipping the churches to go into schools and to serve. And I picked up on the coaching thing. And so can you tell us a little bit about some of the resources that TLG have to help churches sort of walk alongside families, walk alongside young people who are struggling? And the name is quite there, that you would literally help them transform their lives in a good way. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be able to just share a little bit of what we see, because that is what we see. We talk about stories of transformation, and the evidence is just all there that the church, with the right tools in their hands, really can be making a huge difference and lives are changed. So we have 2 programs. So if I start with those, so one is called Early Intervention Coaching, and I would describe these programs as we're all about equipping the church and kind of mobilizing the church, that energy, that can do, that sense of you can do this and we will walk it with you. So that's what TLG is keen to do, just to partner with churches to equip and resource, and then journey. So it's not just here you go, good luck. It's a real sense of journeying with. And I think that our early intervention coaching model, the thing I love about it is we are equipping and training volunteers from the local church to go into school to work with children that the school identify as struggling. And they work for a whole hour a week in term time and for a whole year. But right from the beginning, we're clear with the school. It's all very transparent and all very safeguarded that the coach will connect with home. And so there is that connection point through the year. We're not just talking about term time only. And I was hearing just a couple of days ago about a coach who is working with a child who is really struggling with access to school, but is actually in school twice a week at the moment. And those days, the child is in school. And there's that journeying together of what does this feel like? What does this space look like? So all of our coaching is underpinned with 4 things, and it's a trauma-informed model that we've adopted, developed by Dan Hughes, and it's an acronym called PACE. And PACE is really proven to make a difference to those children who are facing struggles and struggling with their own emotional regulation, emotional resilience. So there's loads of playfulness, lots of acceptance, just accepting the child for who they are, curiosity about them and about the world around them, their internal world, how they're experiencing the world, and empathy. So sitting in that space together so that they are seen and heard. And that's with children in primary school and secondary school age. So our coaching program, the thing I love about it is as the coaches go into school to journey with children, we at TLG journey with the coaches to ensure that they are really feeling well supported. And every coach is encouraged to have a prayer partner, and there's that faith element to just praying for those families and connecting with the wider church community. So again, just really clear from the beginning with school that if the families are warm to it, then we believe the local church as a community is just a wonderfully rich and safe space for families to like connect and grow and flourish. So that's sort of bridging. So that's
so it's that whole overlapping circles of the church and the home and the school connecting and supporting the child, their spiritual development, hopefully also for the parents, because it's great if a young person makes some progress, but if it's the whole family system is part of this, isn't it?
And we talk about this triangle around the child. And so there's no faith content in the actual coaching hour. That's all about emotional well-being, emotional resilience. And that I think is really important for churches to honour that so that the church can be in schools all over the UK, not just faith schools. And that's really important. We really believe that's our call, as the church, to be out in community with all people. And then the other program I already mentioned is called Make Lunch. And that's we partner with churches and just help them to create these spaces that are about meals that matter. So hot meal, lots of, again, playfulness and acceptance, curiosity and empathy in those spaces. And churches can take that and run with it as much as they want to. That can be a cafe every week after sort of the working day, or it can be in the school holidays. Again, it's for churches to shape. It's very much for churches to be equipped and released to do what God is calling them to do in their community. Because as we know, like all contexts are different. And you've already said those one-to-one relationships, there's nothing, I think, more beautiful than people connecting within community because there's a shared experience of living and lived experience. So we are not at all about, having the fix and seeing, like, it's about journeying with and being incredibly relational and being called. We talk about being called to join in with the work that God's doing. But
I've got a really practical question.
Yeah.
If you've got a church that hasn't got like an all bells and whistles industrial kitchen,
Yeah.
Can they still make lunch?
Yeah.
Can you buy in pizzas? Can you
They can
buy sandwiches from Sainsbury's? Like, does it have to be of a certain level?
No, not at all. No, no, no. It genuinely is just equipping the church to do what they are able to do. And we have, huge spaces with like huge teams and very small churches doing beautiful things, and sometimes food parcels actually that like our bags that are given to families. So just, there's lots of flexibility there. The one thing there's no flex on is the safeguarding. So it's just that recruitment of teams and volunteers and all that due diligence. And of course, we can support really well with that as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. And we know food poverty is a huge issue growing in the UK. And in my mum's church, they just give out packed lunches in the summer. Like, they literally have
Really?
pre-bagged packed lunches and they just give them out. And she says, we don't ask. If the kids come forward, we give it to them. It's not like, do you need this?
Yes.
It's everybody gets one.
Yeah.
But there's that equality.
Yes.
That we can all sit and have lunch together, and then that creates a lot of conversation. People are like, why are you doing this? Why are you giving this away? That, as you say, that opportunity to sit together, to build relationship over lunch, I think that's really key.
Beautiful. Yeah. And then both of our programs, and then just, I would say, everything that we're doing at TLG to innovate and pioneer kind of new. We've got some pilot projects happening in churches at the moment, and one just about to launch, where we are just kind of thinking more widely about how we resource the church to be these therapeutic spaces, these trauma-informed spaces that truly, culturally, are surprisingly wonderful for people to connect with. And that's a journey for churches. And again, every church is different, every community is different, but we do have training in, we call it emotional first aid. So helping churches, so people who come along to that online training, it's free, and it's just equipping individuals to understand what's going on when we are emotionally dysregulated, what's happening in our brains, what's happening in our bodies. And so in understanding that, we can then understand and bring care to others. So a huge part of that is about how do we care for ourselves so that we can be grounded and understanding how we're responding. And then how can we help co-regulate others? So as we experience perhaps children or young people or adults who are really struggling to regulate emotions or to sort of turn up in ways that, we would maybe consider to be appropriate, actually for churches and individuals within church communities to be understanding that there's something going on here and I can bring a response here that is going to help bring the calm. And then at that point, we can do some listening and all of that equipping around why is that biblical? Why is that us actually leaning into the model that God has given us for relationship, which is wholly therapeutic. We see it there through the Bible, and wholly relational. And so that although it is, it's training, but the heart of it is to bring that culture change within churches. And we've got a resource that sits along that side that called Emotional Roller Coaster, which it says what it is, and that's equipping really adults who are more in relationship with children and young people to just understand their own emotional regulation. And we talk about this, staying on the ground while others are on their emotional roller coaster. And what does it look like to not be pulled onto it, but to just be with them and to bring the calm. And we're fortunate enough to hear really good feedback from just that sort of very simple training, just making a difference to the way that people are approaching relationships and are, just curious about a different way of understanding others. And I think that's beautiful. So our whole heart is for this therapeutic approach to relationship, and that comes from us just seeing it as the way that God's created us to be, and the way that God is, I think, kind of reminding the church that that's who we are. All we have is in our hands, but sometimes we need a bit of support to kind of feel the confidence. And that's what TLG is. Our mission is to just reach churches everywhere and encourage that confidence.
I just think it's such a pastoral and leadership skill. And it's maybe not one that we get taught in seminary or church leader training, but it's probably the one that you're going to use the most is how do you're in a public space, you're leading public gatherings, you're not quite sure who's going to walk through the door, and you're going to get all sorts of unpredictable behavior. You're not going to know all these people's backstory. How can you hold a space where you're going to get unpredictable behavior reactions? How can you be a safe space where people can bring them full selves?
Yes.
With all of the emotion and all of the spiritual background? We want them to bring that to God. We want them to bring that to church.
We do.
But we can't freak out the moment they do. And so how do we hold a space, but by holding that space, still make it safe for everybody else so they can bring their stuff without scaring the other children or being inappropriate to others? And that is a skill. That is, there's some self-management, as you say, there's some awareness, but there's a skill in how you lead. And we want to upskill pastors, church leaders, vicars, children's workers, volunteers, all of them to hold that space well. And the bonus is it impacts all of your relationships really well. It makes you better in your friendships and marriage and your family. So big win.
Yeah.
This isn't that drudgery of volunteer training. This is a training that will actually equip you.
Yeah.
And I just keep coming back to this. Some of the methodology and the philosophy behind coaching, I think is really key to how we do discipleship and learning in church. And I think sometimes we can stay in a more education model, which is like, I'm going to give you facts and information and you're going to go away and apply it. But I think there's something about that coaching model, which is listening and reflecting back and helping them discover the problem and helping them discover the solution.
Absolutely. And
that's more like discipleship.
It totally is. And it's wholehearted, isn't it? It's joining our left and right brains and seeing ourselves as whole people. And I think being honest about that journey towards that is lifelong and it can be quite uncomfortable. So practicing it can feel really quite clunky at first. And there can be quite a lot of kind of internal self-regulation going on whilst leading in a certain way or presenting in a certain way. And I think it's appropriate and honest to be just bringing that as leaders and naming it as uncomfortable and noticing and naming what emotions it brings up for us and doing the work in ourselves. And again, it's a work. So it's a journey. And so us, I think, as leaders, leaning into coaching and being curious about ourselves so that we are understanding what's here, what's being triggered for me, or what is, where's my response coming from? And I think we've got a lot of, I know I'm biased, but we do have a lot of great resources. We've got an online resource shop, and I really love our set of resources that are actually aimed at parents and carers. I just think they're wonderful for everyone, and they're very simple. They're called Let's Think About. And one of them, there's Let's Think About Dealing with Anxiety, Let's Think About Dealing with Trauma. But one of them is Let's Think About Caring for You. And I think, again, whether you're a leader in a church or you're a volunteer in a church or you're part of the church family in another way, I think the more that we can encourage self-care and self-awareness, the evidence is there that if we are getting those rhythms in and knowing what's in our own emotional toolkit that we can draw on at the times when we're noticing we're dysregulating. We talk about our internal stress style, and it's kind of when we feel it kind of shifting pretty quickly round to alarm. Actually, I think if we've got those tools and a bit of accountability where someone is saying to us, are you looking after yourself? And when we prioritize that self-care, we are able to regulate so much more effectively. And life is full of stresses, and some stress is healthy, being alert and awake and kind of in that brain state where we're, ready to learn and kind of bringing our energy, it's great, but it's those stresses that we know are going to pass because we're going to, meet that target or just enjoy this little bit of challenge and it will pass. But we know that there are, for so many, and to take it back to children and young people, there are so many and families who are just experience those stresses that we would call toxic stress, that they don't come to an end, or there's a sense of when is this going to end. And we know that the impact that has on, we now know, brain development, and so therefore
cortisol levels, so stressful. It makes your health go, all sorts of things. Yeah.
It does. And so those ACEs that children experience, those adverse childhood experiences, the impact, we're now understanding much more, aren't we, that it makes a difference to long-term outcomes. Well, I think the more that the church as a community can be doing to be equipping the community and role modeling a sense of self-care and healthy rhythms, then is attractive as well to families who are seeking a safe space where they can just pause and regroup for a moment. And if we can create those spaces, great. But if we can create that culture, that's a whole different rate in my mind.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I do just think there's that information about the ACEs that they say the biggest differentiator between a child who has all these ACEs doing well and the child who has all these ACEs just really hitting rock bottom is that consistent, significant adult who sees them through. It can be one, and it doesn't have to be a parent.
Yeah.
And I just think that's where the church steps in. Or it can be, that coach at school who's meeting with them, that grandma at church who sits down and talks to them consistently, that person they meet at Make Lunch, that person can make all the difference.
One person.
Yeah, so it's not a program, it's doing relationship well. And I think this comes back again to where we started. So if you've got these young people who are struggling with school or not even going, they are homeschooling or refusing for whatever reason, when you find out about that, the way in for churches is relationship. Build relationship in whatever way, slowly, gently. If you're doing this training and this coaching and this sort of understanding is in the background, you are going to be a significant and helpful person in that child's life or in that family. It could be more than just significant. It could be really transformational for that family. And so, it's the little things. It's a little bit of relationship. So spotting it and stepping into that gap. And again, I think people can imagine a little bit of a hero complex here of gosh, I'm going to have to step in and I'm going to get dragged into these really murky situations. And that's not what we're advocating.
No.
We're advocating really safe, healthy helping.
Yeah.
And we do have to be careful because we can get a bit heroic as Christians.
That's really important. I think that's why I would do. And I do really love the PACE model that for us, that just underpins everything. And I think, playfulness doesn't always mean that you're woo, and, it's all about the games. Actually, sometimes it's just bringing a little bit of lightness into a moment or a bit of distraction, just for a moment, not to take away from the, real challenge that is happening here, but actually a break from that can be just like balm to the soul. And I think, again, it is about this changing the culture of the church from perhaps what people might expect, which unfortunately historically can feel like judgment. Whereas with PACE, you've got acceptance right at the heart of it. And, loving Christians, showing acceptance and not bringing judgment, and just a little bit of curiosity and empathy, I think is just the way to connect. It's the way to bring relationship. And as you say, then it doesn't have to be that it's unbounded and that you just are suddenly kind of drawn in and feeling like this is now your burden. The work is God's and we are his hands and feet, and how we step into relationships and journey with people is, again, if we're willing to just offer ourselves in that way, I think we just get the privilege of seeing that actually the work is God's. And we so often hear that from our volunteers, that they volunteer thinking and and it's fair enough, thinking that they're going to go and help a child in school. And what the beauty that we hear is that actually for their own discipleship journey and their own relationship with God, they go on a whole different journey that they could never have even imagined. And that's beautiful. Like, it's surprising and it's wonderful. And we have so much to learn from children and young people. And again, brings us back to that intergenerational community. Wonderful.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I wonder if I can just finish this conversation by praying, just aware of schools going back and for how many people that is challenging. So, Father God, we ask that you would be with all young people and children and those who work with them, whether in school, outside of school, through the church, parents, carers, coaches. God, we ask your hand of blessing on these young people. We know that many struggle with anxiety, with mental health challenges. God, we ask that you would bless their lives, that you would touch them, and God, that you would bring significant adults into their lives who can coach them, who can walk with them, can help them co-regulate, and can ultimately help them meet Jesus, who transforms our lives. And God, we ask that you would give us wisdom as church leaders and volunteers as to who to get alongside and how best to do that. God, would you guide us, give us insight, wisdom, and help us be drawn to just the right resources. Thank you, God, so much for the work of TLG, and thank you for Kate. And we do pray, God, that you would continue to impact young people all across the country through this ministry. In Jesus' name.
Thanks, Melanie.
That's all right, Kate. It's been brilliant to be with you. Thank you so much.
Great to be here. Thank you.
As you prepare for the back-to-school season, allow this conversation to help you be sensitive to the different experiences of school and education in your church and community. Could your church be part of supporting young people or families relationally or through coaching in schools? You can read Kate's article on this topic online at rootsforchurches.com. Check the show notes for links. And find out more about the resources and training available at tlg.org.uk. As you celebrate Education Sunday on the second Sunday in September, you can find resources to help you pray for and commission all ages into their various spaces and ways of learning. Roots produce a wealth of resources to help you lead great church, from service outlines to youth and children's sessions, including ideas for Education Sunday. See everything that's on offer at rootsforchurches.com, where you can take out a free trial. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with leaders in your church and network, and leave us a review, as that helps others find it. Together, we can grow.